Deep beneath the cold Atlantic Ocean, German submarine commander Klaus Weber felt completely safe. It was 1943, and his U-boat was sliding silently through the dark water like a metal shark. Weber smiled to himself. Up above, American ships were passing by, but they had no idea he was down here. At least, that's what he thought. For years, German U-boats had been the terror of the seas. They were called the Grey Wolves, and they hunted in packs. These submarines could sneak up on any ship, fire their torpedoes, and disappear before anyone knew what hit them. The German commanders were confident, almost cocky. They believed their submarines were invisible underwater. They thought they were ghosts that nobody could see or hear. But Weber and thousands of other German U-boat commanders were terribly, dangerously wrong. What they didn't know was that American scientists had created something incredible, something that would change naval warfare forever. It was called sonar, and it could see submarines through the water using sound waves. The Americans could track U-boats from miles away, and the Germans had absolutely no clue. Let me take you back to understand how this all happened. When World War II started in 1939, German U-boats were destroying Allied ships left and right. Imagine being on a cargo ship in the middle of the ocean. You're carrying food, weapons, or fuel to help win the war. Suddenly, boom, a torpedo slams into your ship. You never saw it coming. The U-boat was hiding underwater the whole time. This happened over and over again. The Germans were sinking ships faster than the Allies could build new ones. The situation was desperate. Britain needed supplies from America to survive, but German U-boats were creating a blockade. They called it the Battle of the Atlantic, and for a long time, Germany was winning. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank over 1,000 Allied ships. The ocean was becoming a graveyard of ships and sailors. American and British leaders knew they had to do something. They couldn't just keep sending ships out to be destroyed. They needed a way to fight back against these underwater predators. That's when scientists started working day and night on a secret weapon. This weapon wasn't a bigger gun or a faster ship. It was something much smarter. Technology that could find submarines hiding in the depths. The technology was called sonar, which stands for sound navigation and ranging. Here's how it works in simple terms. Imagine you're in a dark room and you clap your hands. The sound bounces off the walls and comes back to your ears. That echo tells you where the walls are. Sonar does the same thing underwater. A ship sends out sound waves into the ocean. When those sound waves hit something solid, like a submarine, they bounce back. By listening to these echoes, operators could tell exactly where a U-boat was hiding, how deep it was, and which direction it was going. The German commanders knew that ships had listening devices. They had some basic underwater listening equipment too. But they had no idea how advanced American sonar had become. The new American sonar systems could detect a submarine from over 2 miles away. That's like standing in one end of a town and hearing someone whisper at the other end. It was incredible technology for that time. What made it even more effective was that the Americans kept it very, very secret. When American destroyers found and sank U-boats, the Germans assumed it was just bad luck, or maybe the destroyer spotted the periscope. The U-boat commanders would radio back to Germany saying things like, "I think they saw our periscope," or "We must have left an oil trail." They never suspected that the Americans could actually see them through the water with sound. The Germans were so confident in their submarines that they didn't think it was possible to detect them underwater. Their training told them that if they stayed deep and quiet, they were safe. Submarine commanders would celebrate when they dove deep, thinking they had escaped. Meanwhile, up above, American sonar operators were tracking every move they made, watching the U-boat on their screens like it was lit up with spotlights. This false confidence cost Germany dearly. U-boat crews thought they were the hunters, but they had become the hunted. They were like wolves who didn't know that the sheep had learned to see in the dark. Every time a U-boat went out on patrol, it was swimming into waters where the Americans could track its every movement. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic technological advantages in military history. The Germans had the submarines and the brave crews, but the Americans had the eyes to see them coming. As 1943 rolled on, the tables were about to turn in the Battle of the Atlantic, and the proud U-boat commanders were about to learn a harsh lesson. In modern warfare, the side with better technology often wins, no matter how brave or skilled the warriors are. Captain Hans Müller sat in his U-boat commander's chair, feeling the gentle rocking of the submarine beneath him. He had been hunting Allied convoys for 2 years and had sunk 15 ships. He was confident, experienced, and completely unaware that he was being watched at that very moment. 3 miles above him, on the deck of an American destroyer, a young sailor named Tommy Richards was staring at a green glowing screen, watching a bright dot that represented Müller's submarine. The technology that Tommy was using seemed like magic, but it was pure science. The sonar system on his destroyer was sending out invisible sound waves through the water, thousands of them every minute. These sound waves traveled through the ocean at about 3,400 miles per hour. When they hit Müller's steel submarine, they bounced back like a tennis ball hitting a wall. What amazed the American sailors was how much information they could get from these sound echoes. They could tell how big the submarine was, how deep it was swimming, how fast it was going, and even which direction it was turning. Some experienced sonar operators claimed they could even tell what type of U-boat it was just by the sound signature. Each submarine had its own unique acoustic fingerprint, like a person's voice. The Germans, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening. When U-boat commander Müller decided to dive deeper to avoid detection, he thought he was being clever. He ordered his crew, "They'll never find us down here." His men nodded and smiled, feeling safe in their steel tube. But up above, Tommy Richards just adjusted a dial on his sonar equipment and kept tracking them perfectly. Going deeper didn't help at all. The sound waves found them anyway. This was happening all across the Atlantic Ocean. Dozens of American and British ships, equipped with advanced sonar, were hunting U-boats that had no idea they were being tracked. It was like playing hide-and-seek with someone who had X-ray vision. The U-boats would hide, and the Allied ships would find them every single time. The American sonar technology had come a long way in a short time. At the start of the war, early sonar systems were basic and unreliable. They could only detect submarines at very close range, maybe a few hundred yards. The displays were hard to read, and operators needed a lot of training to interpret what they were seeing. Ocean conditions like temperature, currents, and marine life could confuse the equipment. Many times, operators would track what they thought was a submarine, only to discover it was a whale or a school of fish. But American scientists worked tirelessly to improve the technology. They studied how sound traveled through water at different temperatures. They learned that the ocean had layers, kind of like a cake, with different temperatures at different depths. Sound waves behaved differently in each layer. The scientists figured out how to use these layers to their advantage, bouncing sound waves in ways that could find submarines even better. By 1943, the sonar systems were incredibly sophisticated. The newest equipment could track multiple submarines at once. Operators could distinguish between a submarine and a whale or a shipwreck. The range had increased dramatically. Some of the best systems could detect a U-boat from over 5 miles away in good conditions. That meant the U-boat was being tracked long before it even knew an enemy ship was nearby. The Americans also developed something called active and passive sonar. Active sonar was like turning on a flashlight in a dark room. The ship would send out loud pings of sound and listen for the echoes. This could find submarines very accurately, but it also told the submarine that someone was looking for them. Passive sonar was sneakier. The ship would just listen without making any sound. Submarines make noise when they move. Their engines rumble, their propellers spin, their hulls creak. Passive sonar operators wore headphones and listened to these sounds like they were listening to a radio. They could hear a submarine coming from miles away, and the submarine never knew it was being heard. German U-boat commanders had some listening equipment too, but it was nowhere near as good. They could sometimes hear the propellers of ships far away, which would warn them a convoy was coming, but they couldn't see what the Americans could see. They couldn't track targets with the same precision. Most importantly, they didn't realize how well they were being tracked. The psychological advantage was enormous. American destroyer captains knew exactly where the U-boats were. They could plan their attacks carefully, moving their ships into perfect position before dropping depth charges. Depth charges were large barrels filled with explosives that were set to explode at a certain depth. When a depth charge exploded near a submarine, the pressure wave could crush the hull like a tin can. German commanders, on the other hand, were operating blind. Some thought there must be spies revealing their positions. Others believed the Allies had aircraft they couldn't see. The truth that they were being tracked by sound waves through miles of ocean water was beyond what they imagined was possible. This technological gap was deciding the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. Every day, more U-boats were being sunk. The crews were brave and skilled, but bravery couldn't overcome technology. It was like knights in armor facing machine guns. The U-boat commanders kept using the same tactics that had worked before, not realizing that the game had completely changed. The morning of the 15th of March, 1943 started like any other for Commander Wolfgang Kruger and his U-boat crew. They had spotted a convoy of merchant ships crossing the Atlantic, carrying desperately needed supplies to Britain. Kruger smiled as he looked through his periscope. There were at least 20 ships out there, fat and slow, perfect targets. He had no idea that this would be his last patrol. Kruger ordered his crew to prepare for attack. The U-boat moved into position, staying deep to avoid being seen. Everything seemed perfect, which made it harder for lookouts on the ships to spot a periscope. This was going to be easy. What Kruger didn't know was that 4 American destroyers were escorting that convoy, and all 4 had the latest sonar equipment. Even before Kruger's U-boat had gotten within 5 miles of the convoy, the sonar operators had detected it. Lieutenant James Anderson, a sonar operator on the destroyer USS Baker, had marked the submarine's position on his chart. He had been tracking it for over an hour. Anderson reported to his captain, "Contact bearing 045, range 4,800 yards, depth approximately 150 feet, speed 8 knots. The captain nodded and gave orders to move toward the submarine's position. The destroyer began to accelerate, turning smoothly through the water. Down below, Kruger had no idea death was racing toward him at 30 knots. The way depth charge attacks worked was both simple and deadly. The destroyer would position itself directly above where the sonar showed the submarine was located. Then, it would drop depth charges off the back of the ship and shoot some from launchers on the sides. These explosives would sink down through the water, set to explode at different depths. The idea was to create a pattern of explosions that the submarine couldn't escape from. Kruger was lining up his shot on a merchant ship when his radio operator suddenly reported hearing propeller sounds. The submarine's nose tilted down sharply as the crew worked frantically to take the boat deeper. Inside the U-boat, men grabbed onto whatever they could to keep from falling. The crew held their breath. This was the moment every U-boat sailor feared. Being hunted by destroyers was like being trapped in a metal coffin while someone tried to crush it. The U-boat went dark and quiet. Men communicated with hand signals. The only sounds were the creaking of the hull and the terrified breathing of 70 men who knew they might die in the next few minutes. Up above, the destroyer had never lost contact. Anderson watched his sonar screen like a hawk. "Target is diving, now at 200 feet and still going down," he reported calmly. The captain ordered, "Set depth charges for 200, 250, and 300 feet. Pattern Alpha." Sailors rushed to set the charges to explode at different depths. They wanted to bracket the submarine, hitting it from above and below. The destroyer passed over the submarine's position. Depth charges rolled off the stern, splashing into the water. More charges fired from the side launchers. Kruger heard the splashes far above. He knew what was coming. "Brace for impact," he ordered. Every man in the submarine grabbed onto something solid and waited. Boom! The first depth charge exploded. Even though it was 100 feet away, the pressure wave hit the submarine like a giant fist. The U-boat shook violently. Light bulbs shattered. Instruments jumped on their panels. A pipe cracked, spraying water. Men were thrown against the walls. Boom! 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 More explosions. Closer now. The submarine was being tossed around like a toy in a bathtub. Cork insulation fell from the ceiling like snow. The electrical system flickered. In the engine room, a young mechanic was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. Kruger tried to remain calm, but inside he was terrified. How were they finding him so accurately? It was like they could see right through the ocean. The destroyer made another pass. More depth charges. This pattern continued for over an hour. Every time Kruger thought they had escaped, the destroyer would appear directly overhead again, as if it knew exactly where they were. The U-boat was taking serious damage now. More leaks had appeared. The air was getting thick and hard to breathe from all the carbon dioxide building up. Some men were crying. Kruger faced an impossible choice. He could stay underwater and hope the destroyer ran out of depth charges or gave up, but his submarine was being destroyed piece by piece. The hull could only take so much punishment before it collapsed completely, killing everyone instantly. Or he could surface and surrender, which meant spending the rest of the war in a prisoner camp but at least staying alive. He chose life. "Surface the boat," he ordered quietly. His officers looked at him in shock, but they obeyed. The U-boat rose toward the surface, badly damaged and defeated. When it broke through the waves, Kruger climbed out of the hatch with his hands up. The American destroyer was right there, guns pointed at them. Kruger's crew followed him out, blinking in the sunlight, grateful to be alive but humiliated by capture. As American sailors took the Germans prisoner, Kruger asked the destroyer's captain, "How did you find us? Did you see our periscope? Did you have aircraft we didn't spot?" The captain smiled and said, "Sonar. We tracked you the whole time with sonar." Kruger looked confused. "But we went silent. We went deep. How could you possibly track us through all that water?" The captain didn't explain further. It was still a military secret, but Kruger would spend the rest of the war in a prison camp wondering about this mysterious technology that had defeated him so completely. The sinking of U-boat after U-boat was creating panic in the German naval command. Admiral Dönitz, the commander of all German U-boats, sat in his headquarters, staring at reports that made no sense. In the first 3 months of 1943, he had lost over 40 submarines. 40! That was more than in any previous 3-month period of the entire war. Something had changed. But what? Dönitz was a brilliant naval commander and a firm believer in submarine warfare. He had developed the wolf pack tactics that had been so successful earlier in the war. The idea was simple but deadly. Instead of U-boats hunting alone, they would work in groups. When one submarine spotted a convoy, it would radio the position to other U-boats in the area. Then all the submarines would attack at once from different directions, overwhelming the escorts. This strategy had worked amazingly well in 1941 and 1942, but now the wolf packs were being slaughtered. Submarines were disappearing at an alarming rate. Dönitz would send out a patrol of 10 U-boats, and only 3 would come back. The survivors told confusing stories. They reported that Allied destroyers seemed to know exactly where they were, even when the U-boats were running silent and deep. Depth charges were exploding with impossible accuracy. One survivor, Lieutenant Klaus Schmidt, described his experience to Dönitz directly. "Sir, I followed all the procedures perfectly. We stayed deep. We ran silent. We made no noise at all. But the destroyer stayed right above us for 2 hours, dropping depth charges that got closer and closer. It was like they had eyes that could see through the ocean. I don't understand how it's possible." Dönitz listened to many such stories. Some U-boat commanders thought the Allies had invented some kind of invisible aircraft. Others believed there were radar systems that could somehow detect submarines underwater, which wasn't possible, but showed how desperate they were for an explanation. A few even suspected that there were spies in the German naval command revealing U-boat positions, though investigations found no evidence of this. The truth was that German intelligence had completely underestimated Allied sonar development. German scientists had told Dönitz that detecting submarines with sound waves was theoretically possible, but not at long ranges and not with any reliability. They believed the ocean was too chaotic, too noisy, too complex for sound waves to work effectively. They were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Making matters worse, the Allies were getting better at using their sonar every day. It wasn't just the technology, it was the training and tactics too. The Americans and British had established special schools where sonar operators trained for months. These operators learned to identify different types of submarines by their sound signatures. They learned how ocean temperatures and currents affected sonar. They learned to distinguish between real submarines and false contacts like whales or shipwrecks. The Allied navies also developed new tactics specifically designed to use sonar effectively. One tactic was called creeping attack. A sonar-equipped ship would track the submarine from a distance, while a second ship moved in slowly and quietly to drop depth charges. The submarine would hear the second ship coming and try to evade, but the first ship was tracking every move with sonar and directing the attack. It was like a cat-and-mouse game where the cat could see in the dark and the mouse couldn't. Another effective tactic was the coordinated attack. Multiple destroyers would surround a submarine, all tracking it with sonar from different angles. Then they would all attack at once, dropping depth charges in a pattern that gave the submarine nowhere to escape. U-boat crews called this the hammer, because it felt like being crushed between giant hammers hitting from all directions. By mid-1943, the statistics were devastating for Germany. In May alone, 41 U-boats were sunk. That was more submarines than they could build in a month. The math was simple and terrible. Germany was losing the submarine war. Young men were volunteering for U-boat duty and shipping out on submarines that had less than a 50% chance of returning from patrol. It was becoming a suicide mission. Dönitz tried everything he could think of to counter whatever the Allies were doing. He ordered U-boats to stay deeper and run slower to make less noise. He changed patrol patterns and convoy attack tactics. He equipped U-boats with rubber coating on their hulls, hoping it would absorb sound waves and make them invisible to sonar. None of it worked well enough. The rubber coating, called alberic, did reduce the sonar signature a little bit, but not enough to make a real difference. The improved Allied sonar could still detect the U-boats easily. All the rubber coating did was make the submarines heavier and slower. Some U-boat commanders refused to use it because it made their boats perform worse while providing almost no benefit. In Germany, families waited anxiously for news from their sons, husbands, and fathers serving on U-boats. The casualty rates were horrifying. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served on German U-boats during World War II, over 30,000 were killed. That's a 75% death rate, one of the highest of any military service in the war. Young men in their early 20s were climbing into submarines knowing they probably wouldn't come back. It was incredibly brave and incredibly tragic. The propaganda machine tried to keep morale up. Newspapers and radio broadcasts talked about heroic U-boat commanders sinking enemy ships and strangling Britain's supply lines. They played triumphant music and showed pictures of decorated submarine captains. But the families receiving death notices knew the truth. The U-boats were dying faster than they were killing enemy ships. Dönitz kept pushing his men to fight on. He was a loyal Nazi and believed in fighting to the bitter end. He told his submarine crews that they were Germany's greatest weapon, that they were heroes defending the fatherland. But privately, he knew the situation was desperate. The Allies had gained a technological advantage that Germany couldn't match. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost, one submarine at a time, tracked and destroyed by a technology most German sailors still didn't understand. To understand just how revolutionary sonar was, we need to appreciate what naval warfare was like before it existed. For thousands of years, fighting at sea meant seeing your enemy with your own eyes. Ships would spot each other on the horizon and sail closer to fight. Even with the invention of submarines in the early 1900s, detection still relied mainly on visual sighting. You had to see the periscope, or spot the submarine on the surface, or maybe notice the torpedo wake. Fighting a submarine was like fighting a ghost that occasionally became visible. When World War I started in 1914, submarines were already being used in combat, but anti-submarine warfare was primitive. If you wanted to sink a submarine, first you had to see it, which was extremely difficult. Submarines spent most of their time underwater where they were invisible. Ships had lookouts scanning the ocean constantly, hoping to spot a periscope or a shadow beneath the waves. It was exhausting work with very little success. The British and Americans did develop early hydrophones during World War I. These were basically underwater microphones that could hear submarine engines and propellers. A ship would stop completely and lower the hydrophone into the water. Operators would listen through headphones, turning slowly in a circle to find which direction the sound was coming from. If they heard engine noises, they knew a submarine was somewhere in that direction. But these early hydrophones had major problems. First, they only worked when the ship was completely stopped and silent. You couldn't use them while moving, because the sound of your own ship would drown out everything else. Second, they couldn't tell you how far away the submarine was, only which direction. Third, they were very hard to use. Ocean currents, marine life, and other ships made lots of noise that confused the operators. Finding a submarine with a hydrophone was more luck than skill. Between World War I and World War II, serious scientific research went into developing better underwater detection. The word sonar was actually coined by Americans during World War II. though the British had similar technology they called ASDIC. The breakthrough was developing active sonar that didn't just listen, but sent out its own sound pulses and measured the echoes. Think of it like this. Passive hydrophones were like listening for someone walking in a dark room. Active sonar was like shouting, "Hello!" and listening to where the echo came from. The echo would tell you not just which direction the person was, but exactly how far away they were. This was revolutionary. The physics behind sonar is fascinating. Sound travels through water much faster and farther than through air. In water, sound moves at about 3,400 miles per hour, compared to about 760 miles per hour in air. This means you can detect things very far away if you have sensitive enough equipment. But there are complications too. Water temperature affects how sound travels. Sound waves bend when they move between layers of different temperatures. Kind of like how a stick looks bent when you put it in water. The ocean has layers of different temperatures, creating what scientists call a thermocline. Submarines learn to hide in these layers because the temperature difference would bend sonar waves away from them. But American scientists studied these layers carefully and developed techniques to find submarines anyway. Salinity, which means how salty the water is, also affects sound. The Atlantic Ocean has different salinity at different depths and locations. Sound travels faster in saltier water. American research ships spent months mapping ocean temperatures and salinity levels to create charts that helped sonar operators know how their equipment would perform in different locations. The actual sonar equipment was remarkably sophisticated for 1,940 seconds technology. The sonar dome underneath the ship contained a transducer, which could both send out sound pulses and receive echoes. This transducer was often several feet across and could rotate to scan in different directions. It was like a giant underwater flashlight that used sound instead of light. The operator sat in a darkened room looking at a display screen. Every time the sonar pinged, the screen would light up showing echoes from anything solid in the water. A trained operator could look at the pattern of echoes and tell what was out there. A submarine gave a particular kind of echo, different from a whale or a school of fish or the ocean floor. The best sonar operators became incredibly skilled. They could estimate the size of a submarine from the echo. They could tell if it was moving or sitting still. Some claimed they could even tell what type of U-boat it was based on subtle differences in the echo pattern. These operators were like artists, interpreting sound patterns the way a music expert can hear a symphony and identify every instrument. The Americans also developed something called the scanning sonar, which could search in all directions at once, instead of just straight ahead. This was huge because it meant you didn't have to know which direction the submarine was in. The sonar would automatically scan 360 degrees and alert the operator when it found something. It was like having eyes in the back of your head. As the technology improved, so did the displays. Early sonar displays were hard to read, just fuzzy lines and blips on a screen. By 1943, the displays showed clear, detailed information. The screen would show range, how far away something was, bearing, which direction, and even depth. Some systems could track multiple targets simultaneously, showing each submarine as a separate dot on the screen. Training was crucial. The U.S. Navy established sonar schools where operators learned their craft. Training included classroom instruction on the physics of sound, hands-on practice with the equipment, and simulated hunts where submarines would play the role of the enemy. The best students could identify a submarine contact within seconds of the echo appearing on their screen. This investment in technology and training gave the Allies an enormous advantage. While German U-boat crews trained on submarine operations and torpedo attacks, they had no equivalent training in evading sonar because they didn't fully understand what sonar could do. They were learning through painful experience, and many didn't survive long enough to learn. The turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic came in what historians call Black May of 1943. For Admiral Dönitz and the German Navy, it was a catastrophe. The submarines were supposed to be Germany's secret weapon, the tool that would starve Britain into surrender. Instead, they were being hunted down and destroyed at an unsustainable rate. Let me tell you the story of one particular convoy battle that shows how completely the war had changed. It was called Convoy ONS 5, and it became one of the most famous convoy battles of the war. In late April 1943, this convoy of 43 merchant ships left Britain heading for North America. Protecting them were 7 escorts, including destroyers and corvettes, all equipped with modern sonar. Dönitz knew the convoy was coming. He positioned 30 U-boats in a patrol line across the convoy's expected route. This was a massive wolf pack, and Dönitz expected them to slaughter the merchant ships. On paper, 30 submarines against 7 escorts should have been an easy German victory. But the battle didn't go the way Dönitz planned. The U-boats made contact with the convoy on May 4th. They began their attacks, and initially things looked good for Germany. Several merchant ships were torpedoed and sunk, but then the escorts went to work with their sonar. Destroyer after destroyer picked up U-boat contacts and launched attacks. The sonar operators were calling out ranges and bearings, and the ships were dropping depth charges with devastating accuracy. U-531 was caught by sonar and sunk by depth charges. U-630 suffered the same fate. U-638 was detected trying to slip away from the convoy and was destroyed. The battle raged for days, with U-boats trying desperately to get close enough to attack, while escorts tracked and hunted them relentlessly. By the time it was over, 6 U-boats had been sunk, and several others were heavily damaged and forced to retreat. Compare this to the merchant ship losses. 13 ships sunk. The Germans lost 6 submarines and their entire crews to sink 13 ships. At that rate of exchange, Germany would run out of submarines and trained crews long before the Allies ran out of ships. The economics of the battle had shifted completely. What made this even worse for Germany was the training issue. Building a new submarine took months but wasn't impossible. Training a new crew, especially experienced commanders and officers, took years. Every time a U-boat went down, Germany didn't just lose the submarine. They lost men with irreplaceable experience, knowledge, and skill. The Allies could replace ships much faster than Germany could replace submarine crews. After Black May, Dönitz had to make a devastating decision. On the 24th of May, 1943, he temporarily withdrew the U-boats from the North Atlantic. He sent a radio message to all his submarine commanders, ordering them to retreat to safer waters. For the first time in the war, the Atlantic was clear of U-boat wolf packs. It was an admission of defeat. Though Dönitz would never use that word, the statistics tell the story clearly. In 1942, U-boats sank over 6 million tons of Allied shipping. In 1943, even though Germany had more U-boats in service than ever before, they only sank 2.5 million tons. The number of U-boats lost went up dramatically, while the ships they sank went down dramatically. It was exactly the opposite of what Germany needed. Allied soldiers, sailors, and civilians noticed the difference immediately. Supply ships started arriving in Britain with their precious cargo intact. Food rationing could be eased slightly. War materials reached the front lines. The mood in Britain improved. People started believing they might actually win the war. In America, factories were pumping out new ships using mass production techniques. The Liberty ship program was building cargo vessels so fast that new ships were replacing losses faster than U-boats could sink them. One Liberty ship could be built in just over 40 days. Combined with better protection from sonar-equipped escorts, the supply lines across the Atlantic became secure. Meanwhile, in Germany, the mood was darkening. U-boat veterans who survived their patrols came home with haunted looks in their eyes, talking about destroyers that found them no matter what they did. New recruits training for submarine service heard the rumors and knew they were probably heading to their deaths. Some German naval officers started questioning the whole U-boat strategy. If the submarines couldn't operate effectively anymore, why keep sending men out to die? But Dönitz and the Nazi leadership insisted on continuing. They kept building U-boats and sending them out, hoping that new technology or tactics would turn things around. They developed the snorkel, a device that lets submarines run their diesel engines while just below the surface, giving them more speed and range without having to fully surface. But even snorkels couldn't hide U-boats from sonar. The German scientists did eventually figure out that the Allies must have very advanced sonar. Late in the war, they captured some Allied equipment and studied it. They were shocked by how sophisticated it was. German technology had nothing comparable. By then, it was too late to catch up. The war was already lost. The impact of sonar went beyond just sinking submarines. It changed the entire strategic situation. With the Atlantic sea lanes secured, the Allies could build up forces in Britain for the eventual invasion of Europe. D-Day in June 1944 was only possible because millions of tons of supplies and hundreds of thousands of troops could safely cross the Atlantic. If U-boats were still sinking ships at 1,942 rates, the invasion might have been delayed or even impossible. Sonar also freed up resources. Ships and aircraft that had been protecting convoys could be used elsewhere. The psychological effect was important too. Allied sailors crossing the Atlantic felt safer knowing their escorts had sonar. German U-boat crews felt hunted and afraid, which affected their performance and morale. Behind every technological achievement are the people who made it happen. The development of effective sonar wasn't just about physics and engineering, it was about thousands of people working together. Scientists, engineers, operators, and leaders who understood the importance of investing in new technology. The story starts in the 1,930 seconds before the war even began. American and British scientists were exploring ways to detect submarines using sound. They knew war was coming, and that submarines would be a threat. The research wasn't glamorous. It involved spending weeks on research ships, dropping equipment into the ocean, and taking measurements. Scientists got seasick, equipment failed. Early results were disappointing, but they kept working. Research institutions like the University of California Division of War Research and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution became centers for sonar development. Scientists from different fields worked together. Physicists who understood sound waves, engineers who could build the equipment, oceanographers who understood the sea. This kind of collaboration was unusual for the time, but it was necessary. One breakthrough came from understanding that the ocean wasn't uniform. Scientists mapped the temperature layers and currents. They discovered that sound channels existed in the ocean, where sound could travel for hundreds of miles. They learned that during different times of day and in different seasons, sonar performance changed because ocean conditions changed. All this knowledge went into training programs for sonar operators. The operators themselves were often young men, many in their early 20s, who had never seen the ocean before joining the Navy. They came from farms, cities, and small towns all across America. They attended sonar school, where they learned the theory and practiced on simulators. The best students had good hearing and the ability to concentrate intensely for hours at a time. They became specialists, highly valued by their ship's captains. One such operator was Robert Williams from Iowa. He had never seen the ocean until he joined the Navy at age 19. After basic training, he was selected for sonar school because he had scored high on hearing tests. At sonar school, Robert learned to identify different types of echoes. He practiced for hours each day, learning to distinguish a submarine echo from a whale or a school of fish. The training was intense but thorough. When Robert graduated and was assigned to a destroyer in the Atlantic, he was nervous. This wasn't a simulator anymore. Real lives depended on his ability to detect submarines. During his first contact with a real U-boat, his hands were shaking and he was sweating despite the cool air in the sonar room. But his training kicked in. He identified the contact, tracked it, and helped guide his ship's attack. The U-boat was sunk. Robert had helped save his convoy and proven his skill. Stories like Robert's were repeated thousands of times. Young men from all backgrounds became experts in this new technology. They worked 12-hour shifts in darkened rooms, staring at glowing screens, listening to pings and echoes. It was mentally exhausting work that required constant concentration. But they knew how important it was. Every submarine they helped detect and sink meant fewer Allied ships lost, fewer sailors killed. The technology kept improving throughout the war because of feedback from operators like Robert. They would report what worked and what didn't. Engineers would make modifications, new equipment would be tested, and the cycle would continue. This iterative process of improvement was crucial. The sonar of 1,943 was much better than the sonar of 1,941, and the sonar of 1,945 was better still. Leadership played a vital role too. Admiral Ernest King, the Chief of Naval Operations for the U.S. Navy, understood the importance of anti-submarine warfare and made it a priority. He allocated resources, approved research funding, and ensured that new technology reached the fleet quickly. Even the best technology can fail to make an impact because it never gets deployed properly. The British Royal Navy contributed significantly as well. They had been fighting U-boats since the start of the war and had learned hard lessons. British scientists and the American scientists shared research freely, which accelerated development for both nations. This kind of allied cooperation was essential to victory. There were also unsung heroes in factories who built the equipment. Manufacturing thousands of complex sonar units required skilled workers. Many of these workers were women who took factory jobs while the men were away fighting. They assembled delicate electronics, tested equipment, and maintained quality control. Every sonar unit that worked perfectly was partly because of their careful work. The intelligence community played a role too. Code breakers who decrypted German naval communications provided information about U-boat positions and tactics. This intelligence helped Allied ships know where to look for U-boats, making the sonar even more effective. The combination of good intelligence and good technology was devastating to the German submarine fleet. Training facilities had to be expanded rapidly. At the peak of the war, the Allies were training thousands of sonar operators simultaneously. Schools operated day and night, pushing students through intensive programs. Instructors worked long hours, teaching the next generation of operators. The logistics of this training effort were enormous, requiring facilities, equipment, instructors, and support staff. Maintenance crews kept the sonar equipment working under difficult conditions. Salt water corrodes electronics. The constant pounding of waves damaged sensitive equipment. Maintenance technicians worked in cramped, hot spaces below deck, repairing and maintaining the sonar systems. Without them, the technology would have failed at crucial moments. Even the cooks and support staff on the ships played a role. A well-fed, rested crew performed better. Morale mattered. Ships where crews were treated well and worked as a team were more effective than ships with poor morale. The human element of warfare is often overlooked, but it's crucial. This massive collaborative effort, involving tens of thousands of people in different roles, created a system that defeated the U-boat threat. It wasn't just one invention or one person. It was teamwork on a grand scale. People from different backgrounds and skills working toward a common goal. The German U-boat commanders were fighting against more than just sonar. They were fighting against an entire system that was designed to hunt them down. The legacy of sonar technology from World War II extends far beyond that conflict. The lessons learned and technology developed during the war changed naval warfare forever and influenced many other fields. Let's explore what happened after the war and why this technology mattered so much. When the war ended in 1945, the Allied navies had achieved sonar capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years earlier. They could detect submarines from miles away, track multiple targets simultaneously, and conduct coordinated attacks with precision. This technology didn't disappear after the war. Instead, it became the foundation for all modern submarine detection. During the Cold War that followed World War II, the United States and Soviet Union both built large submarine fleets, including submarines armed with nuclear missiles. Detecting these submarines became a matter of national survival. Both sides invested enormous resources in developing better sonar. The basic principles discovered in World War II remained the same, but the technology became incredibly sophisticated. Modern naval sonar systems can detect submarines from dozens of miles away. They use computer processing that would have been impossible in the 1,940 seconds. Operators now look at detailed 3D displays that show the underwater environment with remarkable clarity. Artificial intelligence helps identify contacts and filter out false alarms. But the fundamental physics of sending sound waves through water and listening for echoes hasn't changed. That's still the World War II discovery at work. The sonar technology also spread beyond military use. Scientists realized that sonar could map the ocean floor. Before sonar, humans knew more about the surface of the moon than about the bottom of the ocean. Sonar mapping revealed underwater mountains, canyons, and volcanic ridges. This led to the discovery of plate tectonics and revolutionized our understanding of geology. The mid-ocean ridges, where new ocean floor is created, were discovered using sonar. Fishing fleets adopted sonar to find schools of fish. This made fishing far more efficient, though it also contributed to overfishing in some areas. Marine biologists use sonar to study whales, dolphins, and other sea creatures, tracking their movements and understanding their behavior. Ships use sonar for navigation in shallow or dangerous waters. It helps them avoid running aground or hitting underwater obstacles. The technology keeps millions of passengers and tons of cargo safe every year. Echo sounders, which are simple sonar devices, are standard equipment on virtually every ship today. Sonar principles even influenced medical technology. Ultrasound machines, which use sound waves to look inside the human body, work on the same basic principle as sonar. Pregnant women getting ultrasounds to see their babies are benefiting from technology that descended from World War II submarine detection. Medical ultrasound has saved countless lives by detecting health problems early. The German U-boat commanders who suffered defeat at the hands of sonar would be amazed to learn how their battlefield experience shaped the future. The tactics developed to hunt submarines influenced anti-submarine warfare for decades. Training programs still teach lessons learned from battles like Convoy ONS-5. The importance of combining technology with well-trained operators remains a fundamental principle. The human cost of the Battle of the Atlantic was enormous. Over 30,000 German submariners died, most of them young men barely out of their teens. Thousands of Allied merchant sailors also perished when their ships were torpedoed. The suffering on both sides was tremendous, but the technological advancement that came from this struggle had lasting benefits for humanity. Perhaps the most important lesson is about the value of investing in research and development. The Allied nations that invested in sonar research before and during the war gained a decisive advantage. Countries that failed to invest in technology, like Germany with its sonar program, paid a heavy price. This lesson has influenced military and civilian policy ever since. Modern governments invest billions in research and development because they learned from World War II that technology can determine the outcome of conflicts. The story also shows the importance of scientific collaboration. American and British scientists working together achieved more than either could have alone. Sharing research, comparing results, and building on each other's discoveries accelerated progress. This model of international scientific cooperation continues today in many fields, from climate science to medicine to space exploration. For the young sonar operators like Robert Williams who served during the war, their experience shaped their entire lives. Many went on to careers in science, engineering, or technology after the war. Inspired by what they had learned, they helped build the modern world with its computers, electronics, and advanced technologies. The skills they developed tracking submarines translated to many peacetime applications. The strategic impact was equally important. By defeating the U-boat threat, the Allies ensured that supplies could cross the Atlantic. This made the D-Day invasion possible and shortened the war in Europe. Millions of lives were saved because the war ended sooner. The secure Atlantic sea lanes also laid the foundation for post-war trade and the economic recovery of Europe. The world we live in today, with its global trade and interconnected economies, was made possible partly by those sonar operators staring at glowing screens in 1943. When we look back at World War II, we often think of dramatic battles like D-Day or the Battle of Midway, but the quiet technological war fought in the depths of the Atlantic was just as important. German U-boat commanders went to sea confident in their invisible submarines, never imagining that sound waves were painting perfect pictures of their every move. Their defeat showed that in modern warfare, technology and science matter as much as courage and skill. The next time you hear about submarines, sonar, or underwater exploration, remember those young men on both sides of the Atlantic. Remember the German commanders who didn't know they were being tracked. Remember the Allied sonar operators who tracked them. Remember the scientists who made the breakthrough discoveries. Their story is a reminder that innovation, teamwork, and dedication can overcome seemingly impossible challenges. It's a story about how technology changed warfare, science advanced human knowledge, and one invention rippled out to affect the entire world. The sonar that tracked U-boats in 1943 still echoes through our lives today, in ways those wartime sailors could never have imagined.